So car shows are great. Why? Because sometimes you get to see cars you may have never seen before in your life. And then you just may run into a car that you thankfully now start seeing at car shows a lot, next to a car you never expected to be at a car show. And then sometimes you see the weird things, the stuff that stand out, the stuff that doesn't fit in with other groups. Then you start saying to yourself, what are those like to drive? Okay, so what exactly is this thing? Well, it's the Volkswagen Type 181, which is heavily based on the Volkswagen Type 1, also known as the Beetle, Käfer, depending on what region of the world you hail from. So that means this has a flat 4 engine. This is the 1600, which puts out all of 46 horsepower and 72 pounds of torque. Now 0 to 60, all I'm gonna say is maybe, and VMAX, 68 miles an hour. Well, this is a refreshing change from the cars you and I normally drive. 1,984 pounds, or depending on how you express your weights and measures, 900 kilograms with that. Oh yeah! Well, the speedometer doesn't work, so we don't know how fast we're going. I would not call this quick. I would call this brisk. If you've driven a Volkswagen Beetle before, you kind of understand how this delivers power. What I'm very surprised about is the transmission. After this many years, the shifts are fantastic. They're actually not long, kind of notchy, but they work incredibly well for the age of this car. What's different is where the clutch pedal is. It is farther to the left of the vehicle. Like, for example, you have the front wheel literally right where your foot would be. So you have this very large footrest, which makes it for an unusual driving position. If you are over, I want to say 6 foot, you'd have a problem, especially in this one, because you can't put the seat back. The seat no longer goes forward and backward. Okay, so the first stop of the rally, let's check and see what's going on here on some of the other cars. You've got the 25 Yara Boxster here, and then check this out. Porsche Speedster. I was just chatting with the guy who owns the car. Turns out he is the second owner of the car, and the build number is on the number plate back here. Admittedly, not the fanciest thing on offer, but it is practical to a point. There is storage behind the rear seats, but really to make that work, one needs to kind of get rid of the rear seats, and you could fold them down here. They don't exactly go flat, and as you can see, this doesn't really work as intended from the factory. But there is storage somewhere else. I wouldn't say it's the most usable, because basically it's taken up by the spare tire, and then there is a gas tank down there. This particular car, the gas gauge doesn't work, so to understand how much gas is in it, you have to tap on the gas tank and hear how hollow it is. So driving dynamics, they're a bit different here. Yeah, they're reminiscent of a Beetle, but what's different is the vehicle is wider, and that does indeed change the way the car drives. Believe it or not, it feels more stable going down the road. You'd be shocked how good the ride quality is for such a small, light vehicle. But they're a bit of an asterisk. It all has to do with the speed of the vehicle. We already discussed the VMAX. It doesn't even touch 70 miles an hour, and there's a reason for that. This thing, if you touch even 60 miles an hour, you feel the nose come up, which changes the steering. It goes to an approximation of the steering where the car thinks it should go rather than where you think it should go. So this is really a putt-putt around town vehicle. Okay, so second stop on the rally, and found something I have never seen before, and that is a train that works with pedals here. So you get a whole bunch of people on this train and you actually pedal down the same track that a real train would go down. And we are in Blue Ridge, Georgia, so we've crossed the border. Then another interesting thing I have to show you about this town, they're setting up for a festival for very important guests. And these are indeed very important guests for the Humane Society. They are putting on an event called Paws in the Park here in Blue Ridge, Georgia, and we happen to just come into the festival the day before, so we are missing the festival. And I've tried to chat with this gentleman here. Apparently, he does not like Californians or New Yorkers, but as I was chatting with him, he really doesn't like me. I said, sit, sit, see? He sits, but he doesn't. And now the pièce de résistance, and no, that is not the roof, because having it down is compulsory. You see, one of the latches does not work, even in like 40-degree weather, which it was this morning. Rather, it is the windshield. This folds down like the original Jeep, and then it seats into the hood so it stays down as you are driving, and really there's no issue of it coming up because the car just doesn't go that fast. So a couple of interesting foibles on this one. If one were to do an emergency stop, it absolutely pulls to the right. Then there's third gear. Third gear, it's very wide. That's where you do most of your driving. Second is surprisingly low. What exactly is the Chattanooga Motor Car Festival? Well, it started about 3 years ago, and it was the brainchild of a car guy who lives here in Chattanooga, also happens to own a lot of real estate and a bank here in town. And he decided, let's bring in some of my car friends, like Ken Gross, or the guy, one of the key people running Volkswagen in the US, who invested into this town. He's a racer, also a fellow Greek car guy. And they came up with the idea of a car show in downtown Chattanooga, and they added a hill climb to it. That was the first year. Obviously, there really wasn't a second year. And then now we've got this. It's turned into something magnificent, where it's not a hill climb anymore. It's actually a race course on a disused industrial plot. And it's kind of incredible to see because it's real wheel-to-wheel racing. Then they have cars from all over the world, including a car that was built here in Chattanooga way before Volkswagen actually was built here in Chattanooga. And then you can meet all sorts of new people, like Kira. Kira is not just a very cute dog, but Kira works on Volkswagens and Audis just down the street from here. And that I am not making up. No, it is not that time again to play your favorite game on the options game with today's contestant, the 1973 Volkswagen Thing, because we really don't have all the numbers. The only thing I can share with you is the original base price of this car in the US in 1973 was $3,150. Today they're worth quite a bit more than that, especially in this condition. You see, this car is owned by Volkswagen USA. It's part of their heritage collection, like the Golf GTI that we drove, as well as that 73 Squareback. This particular one is a bit famous. If you saw the movie Speed 2, it was driven by Sandra Bullock in that movie, and that's why it has its name, Sandra. Now, aside from the Hollywood connection, these have an interesting history on how they came to being. You see, the European states in the 50s and 60s saw the success of the American Jeep, the Willys Jeep, and they say, we need a European Jeep. And the idea was all the member states should come together and create a Jeep that could be used for military purposes, humanitarian purposes, UN purposes, etc., etc. Well, no one really stepped up to it. They said to Volkswagen, hey, why don't you build these things? And originally they said, no, there's really no commercial value to us. Then they looked at it again and said, you know, maybe we should build something like this, because with the success of the actual Type 1, if we take the bits from the Type 1 and make it into more of a thing, we could make it into a vehicle we could sell into militaries as well into commercial uses. So in this case, it took the basics, the engine, even all of like the turn signals, headlights, and even down to the turn signals in the back. All of that comes from a Type 1 to make this the Type 181. But one huge difference This one didn't have the same floor pan as the Type 1, which was more narrow. It took the floor pan from the Karmann Ghia, and that's why this is a bit wider. So if you can see from any of those cameras, the interior of the vehicle is military chic. This goes back to good design does not cost extra, and that was well on display in the 70s. Then speaking of not costing extra, all of the switchgear, the steering wheel, the speedometer, everything comes from a Type 1 Beetle. Everything else is purpose design, meaning let's just make a box. Really, the best way to describe the inside of this vehicle, imagine a sandbox without sand in it, and you put seats. That is the feeling, but put aside all of that. So today I was on a rally with like 911 Speedsters, Ferraris, GT 500 KRs, like very unique classic cars. And this car, this little Volkswagen Thing, whenever we went into a small town in Georgia and Tennessee, everybody was looking at this because they realized this one was the belle of the ball. And now the final stop of the day, which also happens to be lunch with a side of Lolas. However, I was able to speak to the proprietor and bring our little Volkswagen here into the shop. This is Garage de Voiture, which is quite a collection here in Chattanooga. I also had the opportunity to speak to Dave Kinney, who is the founder and publisher of Haggerty Price Guide, and we chatted about the value of this specific car. Now, this car, I would argue, is somewhere between a condition 2 and a condition 1. There is a thing in this collection which is a solid condition 1. It even has wood slats on the floor. I'd say that one is worth somewhere between $40,000 and $45,000, according to Dave Kinney. However, this one, with the history, meaning Sandra Bullock actually drove this car as we discussed, plus the fact that it's owned by Volkswagen, probably makes it around the same value. However, what's the value of these cars when it's not something in this kind of condition, just a driver? Those are between $12,000 and $18,000 US at this point. Now, I did ask Dave, what's the trajectory? Is this going to be like a Samba bus where they wake up and become $150,000? He says they're kind of like the Fiat Jolly. They're agricultural, they're fun, but they're never going to outpace inflation. And with that, I'm going to turn this around to you guys to opine in the comments below as to your stories of the Volkswagen Thing, as well as what you think they are worth and where the market is going. You know what? As good measure, where do you think the Fiat Jolly market is going as well? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV on Word, MotoManTV on Word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, a little bit behind the scenes, while you and I have been talking about the value of this very car, it won an award. My lovely assistant will share it with us. The most unique, or really the weirdest car. I don't know if that's because of the car or the driver. Either way, vielen Dank to Chattanooga Motor Car Festival and Volkswagen of America for bringing the car down for me to drive. And a huge thank you to the proprietor of this establishment for letting me use the garage while we do the award ceremony. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.